A dark day looms over Gainesville, Florida. It's a long, long season that the Gators have had to go through all the way dating back to last offseason, and the inevitable is now seeming to be a reality as Billy Napier's job is officially, not really officially, but getting there to being out the door. And joining me to talk about that and a lot more about who could potentially be a replacement and the disaster of a tenure that has been the Billy Napier era in Florida. We thought Ron Zook was worse. Billy Napier steps in the spotlight. It's the host of Locked On Gators. It's Brandon Olson. Brandon, thank you for taking the time to come see us at SEC Unfiltered. I know the vibes in Gainesville are horrible. We went down there for week one, and it's as somber as it is when we first went there at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, it's brutal. I was also there for week one. I was there front row, right front row to watch that massacre. Broke my heart. Just gonna be honest, that game was brutal. Yeah, it was rough. Cam McCormick's first touchdown was right in front of my face, and I was just like, great, this 30-year-old man scoring a touchdown right there. It was brutal, man, and that's the game. Last year when the recruiting class fell apart towards the end, there were a lot of fans that said, just fire Billy now because things are going downhill. And my take was what it's always been. I will give a guy until year 3. I don't know if you can look at year 3 and say, this is the guy that will win us a national championship. But I do think that you can look at year 3 and say, this is not the guy that can go win us a national championship. And it took week 1 of year 3 for me to say, this is not the guy that can win the Florida Gators a national championship. I'm out. And week 3, another debacle where teams went into your home stadium, scored touchdowns against you, did the Gator chomp, did the thumbs down. We're talking insane amounts of trash to you. And it's just embarrassing at this point for the Florida Gators. Nothing short of embarrassing.
You know, I think about that, judge me by year 3, and I think of Brian Kelly's statement that he made close to the beginning of the year. And essentially, yeah, this is it for Billy Napier and company. Year 3 has been a disaster so far, both off the field and on the field, with the Jaden Rashada scandal to all sorts of offseason talk about what is Billy Napier thinking, how are they looking during practice, and then you look at the on-field production, and this is what you've gotten so far. Before we get into that, let's go back to 2021. You fire a head coach that had went to 2 or 3 New Year's Six bowl games, had won the SEC East a couple of times. Then you fire him midway through another tumultuous season, and then in comes Billy Napier. Now, look, I think that there could have been a lot of better options if you are the University of Florida and if you were Scott Stricklin back in 21. Not only you comes from ULL, the University of Louisiana. I'm a Louisiana guy. It's well known about that. Chris has mentioned this plenty of times on the show. The way he coached offense, it was really, really interesting. He showed production whenever he led ULL to 2 unbelievable seasons. Then he comes to Florida. They're thinking, okay, maybe he can recruit the South well. Maybe he can bring this. And it's just been unbelievable. The recruiting class has fallen apart. You've had flip commits after flip commits. Transfer portal's been a disaster. What else do we need to know other than all that has gone on the last 3 years, Brandon?
Yeah, no, it's just that. Like, things have fallen apart. We were promised this methodical, organized, cerebral head coach, and you look at the wrong things there, or you look at what went wrong, and it's all of those things that were promised. You know, it took 2 full seasons before Florida can get 11 guys on a special teams field consistently at once. You talk about, and there's someone, his name's Astute Alligator on Twitter, and he raised a very good point that I think it helped me realize where I went wrong in thinking Billy Napier was going to be good for Florida. And that is that methodical doesn't always mean smart. methodical means that you have your method. You're going to take that and go with that approach. It doesn't mean that it was a good method. It doesn't mean that it was a smart plan. And I think that's where I went wrong in thinking that, because he's this process-oriented guy, he's going to find success, and he simply hasn't. And one of the key areas where they did nothing short of fail miserably was offensive line recruiting was just horrendous every single year under Billy Napier. And I think they brought in good players in the offensive line, genuinely. I think Fletcher Westfall this year, obviously true freshman, not really playing, but I think he's very talented. I think Najee Harris, Rod Kearney, I think a lot of the guys that Florida brought in on the offensive line were really good additions. The issue was that was it that they brought in. They brought in 3 guys. They don't have an offensive line commit for the 2025 class right now. And the only 2025 offensive linemen they've had committed were Peyton Joseph, who flipped to Florida State, and Enoch Wangoy, who reclassified to the 2024 class. And for a guy with 2 offensive line coaches, something he's done every year of his career except for one, a guy with $1 million, a 7-figure offensive line coach that wants to run the football, you just completely ignore the offensive line trenches like that. It's a complete abject failure. There's no other way to put it. I don't see the logic behind actually keeping Billy any longer, but this is what we're stuck with at this point. You and I were talking off the air. I don't know if firing Mullen was a good decision or a bad decision, genuinely, because I know that Mullen quit on the program. So I think firing Mullen to hire Billy Napier was the bad decision, but I don't think firing Mullen in its own was a bad decision. I think it's more so hiring Billy Napier. And not just that, making Billy Napier your first choice. He was your top option when in-state LSU didn't have an interest in him. I think in hindsight, that's a pretty strong indictment of where you went wrong with this hiring.
Yeah, I mean, offensively, you have seen the demise. You've been through what? You've had Emory Jones come through, I think, for one. Did he come through for one game for the Napier area, or was that Anthony Richardson that was there the entire 22 season?
It was Anthony Richardson the entire 2022 season. Emory Jones stayed there for the transition time.
Okay.
Said that he was going to stay there and compete, went to one spring practice, and got the feeling that he was not actually in a quarterback battle. And so he transferred out to Arizona State and then Cincinnati.
And I remember that first game of Napier's career against Utah. I remember exactly where I was at. I was at a pool house. I was shooting pool with some friends, and I was watching a game, and I looked at how Anthony Richardson performed against a top 10 team. And I'm like, holy cow, this dude could be a Heisman contender. He's in a great system with Napier. And then the rest of the season happened. And we saw the disaster of what happened. And I saw Anthony Richardson's talent get wasted away. I mean, you think about some of the quarterbacks that have come through already. Richardson's talent got wasted. Graham Mertz hasn't really reached his full potential. Now he's in a position to where he may not be the starting quarterback for the rest of the season. If not, he's only going to split time with him and DJ Lagway, who they're going to transition to down the rest of the year until Lagway transfers, because that's what's going to happen at the end of the year. Unfortunately for y'all, I mean, as good as Lagway is and as talented as he is, he doesn't want to be in this offense. And I've heard a lot of talk about him potentially going to Texas A&M with how Wagman's doing. But again, we'll see how Marcel Reed performs the rest of the year, and we'll see what Texas A&M decides to do. But where do you see the future of guys like Lagway, guys that have already been in the program for a period of time in the Napier area? Maybe this is their first year. Do you see them getting out of Gainesville and going elsewhere?
I think it depends. I think the quicker you fire Billy Napier, the better chance you have at retaining players like DJ Lagway, Trey Wilson, LJ McCray is another 5-star edge rusher from this cycle. I think the quicker you get rid of Billy Napier, then the NIL folks can start renegotiating with Lagway and Trey Wilson and all that, and they can start going, hey, Well, what is it going to take to keep you here? And then I also think once you start that coaching search, you can start it with those players in mind. I'm not saying to make the decision based off of a 5-star quarterback. DJ Lagway has shown a lot of promise so far, but I'm not going to act like he's guaranteed to be a Heisman winner out here. So I don't think you should make the decision strictly based off that. But if you've got a guy in mind and you go, hey, we can add him, he can win with us, and we think he can keep DJ Lagway, Trey Wilson, LJ McCray, all these guys, then we do that. As opposed to if you have another guy where you say, hey, it's not as sexy or high. Like the name the Florida Gators fans throw around a lot is Lane Kiffin for Florida. I think if you get Lane, you keep DJ Lagway. You keep basically every player you want if you bring in Lane Kiffin. But if you bring in someone like, I don't know, Lance Leipold from Kansas, which I don't think is an actual option, but just hypothetically, Lance Leipold from Kansas, I don't think DJ Lagway is going to go, oh, I can ball out for him. And so I think then you open the door of the portal. But I think a lot of guys, they genuinely want to win with Florida. I think that's one thing where people talk a lot about the culture at Florida, and they talk about no one likes losing. And while that's absolutely true, I've spoken firsthand to players on this team that have told me outright, you know, like I really believe in Napier. I really believe in what he's doing here. I just hope he gets the time to establish that. And it's becoming increasingly clear he's not going to get the amount of time that they may think he needs. And so I think at that point, it's, well, how much do you just love the logo? Is it you're going to be starting and that's all that matters to you? Like, if your thought process is, hey, as long as I'm a starter on an SEC team, I'll be in position to put up film that NFL teams can look at. And that's good enough for me. The next year is going to be Trey Wilson's money year. He has a good year next year. He's NFL bound. If he knows he's going to be a starter here or basically anywhere he wants, I think that's going to be a big part of his decision of, will he get the opportunity to shine? And hell, even if you get an exciting coordinator, Trey still might want to leave. He's been horribly misused here in Gainesville so far, in my opinion.
Yeah. You know, it doesn't say a whole lot, especially when your boosters are pulling together money to be able to cover to fire a guy like Billy Napier. That's what's crazy to me, man, is that these guys, however many people are in that same room yesterday morning, came together and literally put together $26 million to buy this dude out. That's how bad it was. They never did this with Ron Zook. They never did this with Will Muschamp. They never did this with Jim McElwain. They never did this with Urban Meyer. Oh, wow. That just tells you how bad this program has gotten over the last 3 years of this team. So with that being said, that may be a bad situation right now, but let me tell you about another good situation that's going to happen. We want to thank our good friends at MyBookie.ag. They are celebrating their 10th anniversary this year. Going over to MyBookie.ag and use code SECU at initial sign-up to receive a special welcome offer on your first deposit. Looking at some of the odds right now, Jalen Milroe has screamed up near the top of the charts to be the Heisman favorite, according to MyBookie. So want to cash in on that and some more. Just use code SECU at initial sign-up for that great welcome offer. Brandon Olson of Locked On Gators joining us on SEC Unfiltered. Brandon, who are candidates that we need to be looking forward to as the next head coach of the Florida Gators?
I mean, again, the name that's brought up all the time is Lane Kiffin. I'm skeptical of Lane. I'll be honest about it. This is the first year where he seems like he's really got to put together defense, which, to his credit, you made a change. You brought in Pete Golding. You spent an absurd amount of money on the transport. Brought in Florida's Princely Umanmielen from last year. Brought in Walter Nolan from Texas A&M. Trey Amos at safety. They went in and they added a ton of guys from the portal for their defense because they know, hey, our offense, we can get it going, which they also improved through the portals, namely with Juice Wells at receiver from South Carolina. Think they've done a good job. He seems more serious than ever before, but again, he's yet to field a genuinely dominant defense or a genuinely great defense for an entire season. So far, they've allowed 9 points in 3 games, which I don't care if you're playing high school teams. That's impressive to just give up 9 points in 3 games, especially when you did play a Power 4 program in week 3. But I think Lane's one that's up there. Skeptical of some things he can do. I know one name that people constantly float around is Jed Fish. Washington head coach now, was at Arizona before, is a Florida Gators alumni. And I know that a lot of people like to bring him up. Personally, I'm not as sold on him. I need to see a little more consistency from him. We haven't seen him run a program really long term. And I think that's important to know when you have the longevity of a team. Like Billy Napier, that was one of the things where, well, it's been 4 years at Louisiana. He's gone through a full cycle where we've seen his kids compete and win. Lincoln Riley is a name that Florida Gators fans like to bring up as well. There's some possibility that he's interested in leaving USC, whether that's for Florida or somewhere else. But I think his buyout's too high for Florida. Like, if you have to get boosters together in order to get $26 million together in order to fire Billy Napier, Lincoln Riley's buyout is not public because USC is a private university, so they don't owe you that information. But it's estimated that his buyout's around $60 million. If you have to pull together boosters to get $26 million, $60 million is a significantly higher number there, and it makes things a lot more difficult. So there's those names. I know Alex Golesh from USF is one that gets thrown around a lot, which swinging on a group of 5 coach again would be a decision. I get the feeling that they want to swing low and swing heavy here for a new head coach hire, but I don't think there's a great pool for that right now. Just genuinely, that's my concern, is that I think if you want a big fish head coach, this is a bad year to need that for the Florida Gators. And that seems what they want to do, because I think that your names, Lane, Lincoln, Lanning, I don't think you could afford Lincoln or Lanning. And Lane, I mean, the rumor was he was going to go to Auburn 2 years ago, and then things got leaked and he pulled out of the deal. He'll leave you at the altar. Do you want to bank on that? And then early signing day now is December 4th. It's really early. So if you get left at the altar, you're going to be scrambling and your class will probably almost definitely fall apart.
I think some more names that you didn't mention yet. Jamie Chadwell is another one. I mean, the success that he's had going from Coastal Carolina, making Grayson McCall probably one of the greatest quarterbacks that have come through Coastal, and then what he's doing with Liberty. They make a New Year's Six Bowl the first year that he's there, and what he's doing right now to continue that success is just going to keep going on. He could be a name that throws out, but I don't know if Florida wants to go back to the Sun Belt and take a chance. To me, the most intriguing one is probably Glenn Schumann. And let me give you some. He lives an hour and a half away from Gainesville. That's where his hometown is, in Valdosta, Georgia. He's been under Nick Saban for a long time. Now he was under Kirby Smart. You've seen where previous coaches have come through. Guys like Mike Loxley, Dan Lanning, like we already mentioned. Glenn Schumann's a guy that I definitely would keep my eye on, because I think that he can bring back a lot of swagger. I think he can bring back that Swamp Kings mentality back to Gainesville, Florida. I'm going to treat my superstars like superstars, and I'm going to treat my blank like blank. And I think that's what Florida needs right now. I don't think they've had that for a long time. Probably not since the beginning of the Dan Mullen era. And you're seeing it right now where, I hate to say this, it's almost like the inmates are taking over the asylum kind of. And you saw it a little bit last year. You saw the toxicity kind of be released, especially with how guys were frustrated at how they were being coached, how guys were being utilized in specific offenses or specific schemes. You saw, and you're going to continue to see that this year, especially with the defensive breakdown. Glenn Schumann's coming in there. This dude's a hell of a recruiter. This dude can literally turn your program around. If you need evidence, just look at what Kirby Smart has done with previous assistant coaches that have gone to other head coaching jobs.
Yeah, I think Glenn Schumann's a name to keep in mind, but I think that there's an issue because I think there's 3 things that Florida looks for right now. I think they need a Power 4 experienced coach, which Glenn Schumann is at the defensive coordinator level, not at the head coach level. I think they want an offensive mind. And I think that they need a proven recruiter, which Glenn Schumann answers. I think the offensive mind part is simply the logic that you see often in the NFL nowadays of hire an offensive mind, because if you have a good OC, 2 years, they're gone. A good OC at the SEC level, in 2 years, they're getting an NFL call or a Power 4 head coaching job. And so you have to then find a new OC to replace them. And if you miss on that, your team's going kaput. And Florida dealt with that with Will Muschamp. He couldn't hire a good OC to save his life, despite how incredible his defenses were. So I think that that's one of the concerns of just if you hire a defensive-minded coach or someone who needs that OC, needs an offense, then every 2 years, they're going to be replacing them if they're good. And if you're not replacing them, it's because they're not good. And that's a concern also. So when you bring in a guy like Lane, even if he eventually gives up play calling, it's still going to be his offense. But Glenn Schumann's a hell of a coach. I do think that he's tremendous. Again, I just think that I think they're looking for those 3 bits of criteria, and he doesn't have the head coach experience. He doesn't have the offensive mind, but hell of a recruiter. I'd take a swing on him. I've got no problem hiring a defensive-minded coach. I'm a defensive-oriented person, so I'm fine with it. It's just a concern of whether or not they'd actually pull the trigger there. But I do think that Glenn Schumann is hell of a name, hell of a coach, and I support that defensive system that he runs. Love it. So I'll be there for it anytime, any single time. And like you mentioned, we've seen players be upset with things at Florida. I spoke to a player that hit the transfer portal, and he straight up told me, I'm leaving because the strength and conditioning program isn't good enough, and they're not developing me at my position enough. You talked about scheme. That's one of the reasons Princely Umanmielen left to Ole Miss. He was dropping back into coverage on 25% of the passing downs last season. He left, and he's like, I want to rush the passer. I think he's dropped into coverage like 3 times this entire season so far with Ole Miss. He was told, we're going to use you because it's Pete Golding, who was at Alabama, and he said, I'm going to use you how I used Will Anderson. That's what he's doing. He's rushing the passer. Yes. And right now, TJ Searcy, who's your starting jack, he's dropping into coverage on 35% of his passing down snaps. Like, if you're a premier edge rusher, what is the incentive of wanting to be here if a third of your pass rushing opportunities are taken away to be into coverage?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense for a guy that's 6'5", 255, that you recruited to be a literally a 3-point stance, get down in the dirt, and drop him back into coverage. I never did that whenever I was playing defensive end, especially not in the system that we ran. I can tell you the guys that we have right now at Southeastern with Bill Datavio, they're not doing that. And I can guarantee you right now, what Pete Golding has, what going on with him, with Walter Nolan, those two are doing nothing but rushing the passer. They're getting off the football, and they're going to attack their respective gaps. So going on for the rest of, especially these next 2 games. These next 2 games are just going to be critical. You go to Mississippi State. By the way, we got a couple more for you. You're the 5.5-point favorite going into this one. Mississippi State's coming off of an embarrassing loss to Toledo. They got 41 put on them. Go Rockets, by the way. Look, let me tell you about Toledo. Not many people realize Toledo was this close to going to play in the New Year's Six Bowl game last year if they don't lose to Miami of Ohio in the MAC championship. Hey, Toledo Rockets, stand up. You guys had some dogs last year. Not only do you have Quinyon Mitchell, you had one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the country last year. I don't remember his name, by the way.
Daquan Finn's at Baylor now.
Daquan Finn, that's what it was. I remember talking with somebody about this dude. I mean, come on. That dude was unbelievable to watch. I loved watching a guy like Daquan Finn. They had to play from behind a few times, but this dude was a really good quarterback. Was last year's MAC most valuable player, 22 scores to 9 interceptions, added 563 on the ground last year. And not to mention, their run game was unbelievable for Toledo.
Penny Boone's at UCF now. They didn't take him, but yeah, they were.
I will get to UCF in a minute. Like we mentioned earlier, Penny Boone may run for 200+ against this Florida defense, unfortunately. So when you look at this upcoming game against Mississippi State, we'll get to UCF in a little bit. this may be a game where you finally let the offense sling the rock around a lot more. You saw them be so one-dimensional with DJ Lagway. You saw them not really take a lot of deep shots down the field. And when they did, it was just in bad reads, bad decision-making. Now is the time where you're down, Mississippi State is down. This is an opportunity that could be a high-flying offensive game. I think the over-under is around 57 and a half. It's going to be a high-scoring football game. What do you see going into this weekend, and knowing that Billy Napier's job is essentially done if they end up losing to UCF, not wanting to look ahead, what do you think that this means going into this weekend? What are you going to see from the offensive side of the ball?
I think this is the game where we find out if Billy Napier is even capable of running a competent offense. Because I think that when you look at what Mississippi State's done this year, they've come out with a lot of these 3-down looks on the line, and teams have just pummeled them. I mean, Arizona State, Scatabo had like 200 yards against them, just grinding it out on the ground. And I think that Florida, like, their offensive line struggled so far. But if you struggle against this Mississippi State defense, you're cooked. This is the game to find the run game going again. I'll be interested to see if Trey Wilson is back this week after missing the Texas A&M game. But I think either of your quarterbacks, because for some reason Florida's going to play both of them, I think either of them should be able to exploit a bad Mississippi State defense. And then defensively, I mean, Jeff Lebby runs that Brile spread system. And last year, despite all of the bad things we saw from this Florida Gators defense, the one game they truly showed up in was that Tennessee game against Josh Heupel and that weird shoe, that Brile spread. So I'm interested to see what the approach is. Obviously now Ron Roberts is calling plays defensively instead of Austin Armstrong, but I'm interested to see what the approach is going to be to handle just this Mississippi State game where you should win. Last week, I said on my show, the funniest possible outcome for me is I went to Toledo. So for me, as someone that went to Toledo, watching Toledo beat Mississippi State and then watching Florida lose to Mississippi State would be the funniest outcome. But if you lose this game, just let it be known you deserve to be fired already. But if you lose this game, you absolutely should be given the boot. This is a game that Florida genuinely should win, even with the coaching ineptness.
Because you have a bye week going into next week as well. So now that gives them plenty more opportunities to look back at this game and say, do we really want this guy continuing to finish out the year? Last question for you, Brandon, before we let you go. You've been awesome today. Who takes over if he is to be fired? Is it Ron Roberts through the rest of the season, or is it Jabbar Jaluke, or is it somebody else that we don't know about?
From what I've been told, I think it would be Dan Enos, former offensive coordinator at Arkansas, former head coach of Central Michigan. He is currently an analyst for the Florida Gators. Okay. And from what I've been told, the expectation would be Dan Enos. He's got head coaching experience. I think Ron Roberts would be fired with Billy Napier. I think Rob Sale would be fired with Billy Napier. Jonathan DeCoster takes over the offensive line individually. Russ Callaway takes over offensive play calling. Austin Armstrong takes over defensive play calling. That'd be end linebackers, because he currently does not have an individual position, and he was hired by Alabama to be the linebackers coach before he took this defensive coordinator job. And so I think you get rid of Ron Roberts. Armstrong handles linebackers, handles defense, and those are all the coaching staff moves that you make.
Brandon Olson of Locked On Gators joining us on SEC Unfiltered. Where else can we find you on social media, my man?
Yeah, find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Look up Locked On Gators wherever, TikTok, Instagram, whatever you're on, and Locked On Gators every single day, covering Florida Gators, 30 minutes.
Brandon Olson of Locked On Gators. Check out Locked On Gators on YouTube. Also check them out. Check out Whole 9 Sports, by the way. They are covering the NFL and the NFL draft, covering that since 2019. Also check out his work over at Fan Nation with Giants Country and a lot more. Brandon, hopefully have a great rest of the week. If we can, let's have a great game this upcoming weekend. And if that's the case, it's been a real one with Billy Napier, and hopefully he'll get an analyst job somewhere. Maybe he'll join Dan Mullen in the booth someday.
That'll be the funniest game I've ever seen. Give me Tim Tebow on color, give me Dan, and give me Napier, just all calling a play.
Brandon, have a good one, my brother.
Thank you too.